Hi, I'm Tori, and today I'm going to be reviewing Mary Poppins Comes Back by P.L. Travers. This is the second book in the Mary Poppins series, and I loved it so much. So I read some of the Mary Poppins books when I was little. I don't know exactly how many I read. I know I definitely read the first one. I love the thing with the gingerbread and the stars, and now whenever I eat gingerbread, I always wish it had little gold stars in it, and I love that. I don't know. I feel like I read more than just the first book, but I don't remember exactly how far I got, so I may have read this or I may not have. It was a really long time ago. So I reread the first Mary Poppins book about a year ago, and I decided to read this one since the Mary Poppins movie sequel was coming out, and I thought it would be fun to kind of compare them or have at least this one fresh in my mind going into the movie. And I am actually really glad I did that because there are a couple things from the movie that are actually in the book. It's not an adaptation of the book by any means, but I enjoyed seeing the movie more, knowing the little tidbits from the book. So first of all, I want to show off this gorgeous edition of the book that I got from my library. The book was published in 1935, and this copy is from 1963. It has these beautiful illustrations that kind of wrap around the whole cover. And then inside it has the same gorgeous illustrations. And all of these beautiful illustrations are done by Mary Shepherd. So this book definitely feels like a continuation of the first one. The way that the Mary Poppins books are written, they don't really have a big plot that covers the whole book. Instead, they're just like a collection of little stories of this nanny watching these 4 children. So I don't know how much time has passed since the first book. In this book, the house is in chaos and everyone is in desperate need of Mary Poppins, but the children don't seem a whole lot older. We still follow Jane, Michael, and then the twins John and Barbara. And the twins are a bit older because in the first book they were babies who couldn't really talk, and now they're able to walk around holding Jane and Michael's hands, and they do talk a little bit. So they've aged a little bit, and we know that by the end of the book, Michael is 6. So I'm not quite sure how old the children were in the first book. I'd have to look that up. And I love Mary Poppins' arrival and her departure in this book. She arrives at the end of a kite that Jane and Michael are flying, or maybe it's just Michael, and the park superintendent person helps pull her in, and she just shows up, and just as in the first book, she walks all over Mrs. Banks and just makes herself at home. And then when she leaves, it's really fun. She just gets on a carousel, and the carousel takes off and flies into space, and looks like a star just hovering there in the sky. And I thought that was really cute, and I love seeing all of Mary Poppins' very dramatic entrances and exits. I liked a lot of the chapter titles in this book. They kind of make a joke out of the ones in the first book. In the first book, we had a chapter called Mrs. Lark's Andrew, which was about Mrs. Lark and her dog Andrew. And in this book, we have a chapter called Mrs. Andrew's Lark, which is about a woman named Mrs. Andrew who has a lark. And I thought that was so funny. The first book also has a chapter called Bad Tuesday, which is about Michael just having a bad day where he feels very ornery. And this book has a chapter called Bad Wednesday, which is about Jane having a day where she just feels very naughty and disagreeable. I did think one of the first chapters in the book was very interesting. We see Mr. Banks' nanny from his childhood coming to visit, and she is such a great contrast to Mary Poppins, because in these books, Mary Poppins is so strict and so snarky, and she could probably be described almost as kind of mean, but the children love her and everyone adores her so much. And then we see Mrs. Andrew come, who was Mr. Banks' nanny, and she is just a mean and spiteful person, and she tries to boss Mary Poppins around, and that does not go well for her. So it's such a great contrast to see Mary Poppins, who is very strong and not particularly soft, but is somehow still so lovable even though she is harsh, and then Mrs. Andrew, who is just completely unlikable, and to kind of see how Mary Poppins is still an incredibly lovable person. The most interesting chapter in this book for me was the new one, when a new baby is born. Her name is Annabelle, and what happens is that Mary Poppins stays in the house to help take care of the new baby when she's born. And then we have, I think it's a maid or someone, takes the other 4 children out and just says, oh, there's a bit of a surprise happening. The children don't know, they don't know until they get back and see the baby that there is a new little sibling for them. And there's a whole little thing where Mr. Banks comes in and looks at the baby and tells his wife that Annabelle will be such a great expense, but he supposes he can learn to love her, and they'll manage with it. And I just thought that was so fascinating, because this is a children's story, and so it's not telling little children where babies come from or anything. It's a very interesting way to present the arrival of a new child. And I feel like the general approach to how a new baby arrives is very different from when it would be nowadays. This book came out in 1935, and I think that's when the books are set. I'm not sure. I know the movies are set earlier than that, but I don't remember seeing anything in the books to indicate that they would be set at an earlier time. And Mary Poppins' outfit looks like it's from the 1930s, so I'm guessing that's when that is. And it's just interesting to see how differently we view a new baby now and how much everyone gets ready for it. And in this time, it's just kind of like a secret, and they don't really want to talk about it, and the children don't know ahead of time, and there's just not very much preparation or excitement building up to it. And then there's a beautiful story that goes with it. You know, throughout the Mary Poppins books, there's a thing where babies can speak the language of birds, and babies are incredibly intelligent until they forget and grow up and become adults. And so when the baby is brand new, she's telling the bird who flies in at her window all about the incredible journey she's been on from this magical place, and it's just so beautiful, and I love that. It reminded me very much of the twins chapter in the first book. I think the most beautiful chapter in this book was the evening out, and I love it, first of all, how Mary Poppins never invites Jane and Michael to come with her, but they still get invited, and she'd never admit that she's sneaking them out of their beds to come on this adventure with her, but she makes certain that they are invited and that they do know about these events. And they go to the gorgeous circus up in the sky, and it's so beautiful to see all the constellations, and it's such a lovely idea that all the constellations are these different animals performing in a circus. And it was such a beautiful evening, and it was so gorgeous, but at the same time it was also kind of tragic because a lot of the performers were very unhappy. It was mostly animals, but some of the human performers too were very miserable, and they'd cry. And it's interesting, these books definitely have a dark side. And I think that's a very special thing in children's books, because we tend to think that children can only see bright, happy, positive things. But children are generally aware that the world around them does have some bad parts in it. And it's just so refreshing to see a story that paints these beautiful fairy tale worlds, but shows that they are flawed. And the whole adventure with the Royal Dalton Bowl is very intriguing. You know, Jane's mad and she cracks the bowl, and then she runs away with the characters, and it turns out that maybe that wasn't the best thing to do, and maybe she should stay with Mary Poppins. When I hear people talking about the character of Mary Poppins in books, the most common description is that she's very mean, and she's kind of harsh, and she kind of gaslights the children, but you love her, and people have a hard time explaining why. And it is kind of hard to explain why, because she is so strict, and she does kind of deny the fantastical things that happen around her. And I feel like what she's doing is teaching the children the importance of imagination, and that sometimes it's important to believe things, and you can get so much out of experiencing the world through this lens of joy and hope. And these things do happen in the story. It's established kind of that even if Mary Poppins won't admit it and there's not a lot of proof, you can still see she'll leave her scarf behind in the Dalton Bowl, or she'll have a mark where the sun kissed her cheek. And you know these things happen, but the children don't really need proof. And I feel like Mary Poppins is teaching the children that it's important to embrace joy and magic and wonder in the world. And maybe you can't always justify it or talk about it to other people or say, yes, this absolutely happened, let's document it and write a book about it and prove that it happened. You can just enjoy something and say, I've had this wonderful magical experience, and maybe not everything that happened really happened and is really real, but it's real to me, and it changed me, and I'm so grateful for that experience. There's a quote I love from the book when they're at the circus and Jane is talking to the sun, who is the ringmaster. Then, said Jane wonderingly, is it true that we are here tonight, or do we only think we are? The sun smiled again, a little sadly. Child, he said, seek no further. From the beginning of the world, all men have asked that question. And I, who am Lord of the Sky, even I do not know the answer. I am certain only that this is the evening out, and that the constellations are shining in your eyes, and that it is true if you think it is. And I just think that's such a beautiful sentiment. So I enjoyed this book very much. I had a great time reading it, and I am definitely going to continue on with the series.